All right, so this is a single match that I want to upload, but it was a pretty cool one. This is against Blue Green Omni, and a couple of people have asked how I approach this matchup, so I wanted to run through it um, and kind of demonstrate because this kind of shows why I do the approach that I do. So I know this is Blue Green Omni. I've faced this guy before. Oh, let me rephrase. I'm pretty sure it's Blue Green Omni. I've faced this guy before. With this hand, we are going to keep. Thought being, we have a cantrip, we've got live force of will, and we have disruption. And we'll see how it plays out. So we're on the draw here. Okay, so that was a real good draw. What we're gonna do here is we're gonna play out the catacombs and the pedal. He has seen our play before, or they have seen our play before, so they generally know what we're doing. And we'll just go ahead and keep skipping through. I'll pause it when we get to something more interesting. All right, so interesting point number one. He's about to jam. We have a couple options here. Option number one is actually to entomb in response, but I know this. I'm pretty sure he's running days. So if we entomb in response, trying to fade like we have something else going on, it doesn't actually accomplish anything except for maybe beta force, which I don't think does much for us. So all I'm going to do here is actually just force back, basically seeing what happens. So that tells me he doesn't have a force. Good to know. So I'm going to fetch here, and I'm going to entomb. The thought being it plays around days, and if I draw next turn another mana source, I can either Cabal Therapy for days or force, or I can just play around days entirely. I think force is unlikely to be in his hand if he didn't force this or force this. Days is possible because it's the only thing that we haven't seen action on. Nonetheless, we're going to bend a Gristlebrand. And with this in hand, we're in a really secure spot because what this means, normally I probably would not jam here. I would probably just Cabal Therapy and wait a turn because we have no real pressure, especially if we're able to disrupt. However, this in hand, it doesn't really matter. I mean, obviously, if he goes show and tell, we flash in Gristlebrand and they put in Omniscience and happen to have Emrakul, we're fucked. But that requires them to have like the perfect cards remaining. Seems unlikely to me. So my intuition here is based on the fact that they didn't do anything, and we have this as a backup plan. We're gonna jam. And the reason for this, again, is if he forces, he goes down to 2 cards. It means he needs to have a land, a show and tell, and like put all these pieces together. We still have all sorts of stuff going on. So the fail case for this is almost 0. Otherwise, I would probably Cabal Therapy if we didn't have this Gristlebrand in hand. And he scoops. So we'll move on to game number 2, which is the really actually kind of interesting game. Okay, so game number 2, I'm going to hit play for a second here, and we're going to talk about the opening hands. So I wish I could go back, but I'm not going to do so. This is a pretty good hand. If you're playing along, pause the video, think about what you put back. I think it's pretty straightforward, but you know, some people might struggle here. So we're going to go ahead and put back the edge. And the way I approach this, so just look at the sideboard here. You'll notice Gristlebrand is still in. You notice I took out the Chrome Mox, the Shelldock, 1 Outgoing Truth. I don't even bring in Predict, which actually kind of almost bit me in the ass this game because this ended up in a unique game state. But the idea here is we leave in the fatties as a show and tell target. So if we can navigate the game state specifically to a spot where they show and tell and we've depleted resources and they just feel obligated or priced into putting in a Gristlebrand or an Emrakul, we can probably beat that because they're just out of gas. They basically their deck requires more stuff in hand. They need a show and tell. plus an Omniscience, plus a Fatty or Wish or whatever the case may be. They need more pieces. So if we can trade one for one, that actually is advantageous to us because we need a single card. So we try to trade resources, navigate the game state to a place where we can either let them show and tell after we've resolved the Doomsday, so we just cycle into our Oracle, or that we can put a Fatty into play. So we'll see how that works out here. So I'm just going to play for a minute. This is going to kind of play back. I don't jam, by the way. This is another just like pristine draw. You can't get better than that. So we'll talk about this for a second. So remember, we try to trade resources here. So normally I'm not a big advocate of this, but in this particular state, we're going to fetch, and we're going to brainstorm. The instant brainstorm is not my favorite thing, but the reason for this is if we can find protection, we can jam, force a will out of their hand, possibly have a brainstorm left over, and just win on the spot. Or if we have protection, we force them to burn 2 forces, and again, we're trading resources in a way that is super favorable to us. So let's see how the brainstorm goes. Not great. We're going to put back Oracle, and we're going to draw the fetch. Simple as that. Like a brainstorm was kind of poopy. We're going to keep going here. We still have a shot, though. So if we brainstorm, again, into protection, which we don't, it's not the end of the world. And then I actually go ahead and ponder here. There's a couple things that's going on here. One, I am looking for some sort of counterspell. And 2, because I don't have a counterspell, this gives me 4 looks, this gives me 3, whatever, virtual 4. This actually kind of entices them into casting when I don't have any mana available. So it entices them into show and tell in an unfavorable spot for them. That's a real bad ponder, which we knew some of it, obviously. And we have Suryath. So we're going to see what happens here. I think they're going to EOT. Yeah, so they end of turn brainstorm. I think they're in a similar mindset as we were. And this is where the game starts to kind of slide off the rails and end up in a very unusual state. But we'll talk about the decisions and why we played it the way we did here in just a second. So they cast show and tell. I cycle. I'm looking for something to force some interaction out of them. So if I can find a daze and get them to pop this, or force of will, that's awesome. Don't find it. Shit happens. So we have 2 choices here, but obviously we're going to put in the Gristlebrand, and we're met with a Gristlebrand. So again, we've kind of navigated to the same game state that I like to navigate to. This has just happened to be fortunate that he jammed a little prematurely. And they don't draw. Typically, I won't draw in this situation until they draw if it's on their turn, because it doesn't serve us much, especially if we're tapped up. So we're going to draw here. Dark Ritual's not a bad thing. We're going to start by drawing. And what we're trying to do is pump up our counter magic and get into a game state where we can, again, try to force them to trade unfavorably. And as you can see, we have multiple dazes, a force, and that's about it. So we have 2 dazes and a force, but we have 2 lands. So we effectively have 3 counterspells plus all sorts of mana to play around daze. So let's see where we go next. We're going to play out all of our pieces, which gives us the maximum flexibility. And I make an interesting decision here, which is one that I typically don't end up making, but I go to combat. A couple reasons for this. One, we're at 2 life. If we force after Doomsday, we die. If we force before Doomsday, we die. We care about the life here more than the cards, because we have the cards we need to win on the spot here. So we basically give them the decision to say, Do you want to trade Gristlebrands? Or do you want to give us 7 more cards? And for a second there, I thought they weren't going to block, but they did. This is fine. They're going to draw 14. We both drawn 14, but we have mana available. And that's really the crux of this. They have 1. So they've gotten 14 cards. We basically have to hope they don't have 3 counter spells, basically. And we have... So... Whoa, oh, no. Okay, well, as you can see, we win. I'm going to go back and re-record and flash from that spot on. I will be back in just a second. Okay, and we're back. So, we swing. Again, forcing them to trade Gristlebrand or give us 7 more cards. Which both of those generally benefit us because we have mana and they don't. They opt to trade, draw 14. So we're at card parity, but we're not at mana parity. And we're up life, but I don't think that's super relevant here. So, moving forward, we start with Cabal Therapy. The idea being, it's Blue-Green Omni, it's almost certain, it's nearly a certainty that they have a Veil of Summer in here. There's 0 chance that this Lotus Petal is not representing a Veil of Summer. We're trying to bait that out because we want to counter that Veil of Summer, not have it be the final spell that resolves in the stack, because that just screws us. They cast Veil. So we're going to start, we're going to daze it. They're going to force. We're going to force. They're going to force. We're going to float mana. And we're going to daze. So, at this point, it's pretty straightforward what happens. The idea being that we see their hand. We name Force of Will, obviously. Not that they have one. Realistically, I probably could have considered Surgical here, because that could have been like the last thing that screws with our pile. But as you can see, we're looking at their hand. They have quite literally nothing left that they can do at this stage in the game. What did they pitch? And also look at that Leyline of the Void, also showing that, again, they're setting up a suboptimal version of the deck in order to play against our game 1 game plan. And we can basically ignore that. So they've gone to a 56 card deck with 4 blanks. So because realistically, if you're sideboarding against this deck, even if you know it's potentially going to Doomsday, you can't just ignore it. At least in my experience, nobody does. So nonetheless, we're free and clear. We can just Doomsday win from here, from 8 life. So I kind of had a long day, and my pile's kind of trash here. But basically, it's just a Doomsday pile that has a Cycler, a Preordain. I have a Preordain, and I like totally brain fart here, and I don't know if the game's gonna show it back correctly, but basically I have 2 Cyclers, a Preordain, a Cavern, and an Oracle. I don't need the Cavern. I basically just need to draw 2 cards in, so any thoughts that go into this are basically irrelevant. I tanked, and like I said, I've had a long day, so this pile is garbage. We brainstorm, and really what I should have done here is... Okay, so this is already incorrectly showing things, because I'm about to cycle. Oh, maybe not. Maybe that's 1 step later. And the game freaked out anyways. It's not showing. But basically, we're able to draw into our cyclers, cycle through the LED into that last Preordain into Oracle, and have plenty of mana floating when the game ends.